the original opening, the curtains and everything in this, and the shot, kind of the way that this was supposed to feel, harken to the opening of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I always loved that scene where Newman is walking through the bank and they're locking up the bank, and you just sort of see these little bits of stuff. It has a sort of, it was kind of also how run down this house was. It was like, you know, the lace curtains and stuff, and the sense of decay was kind of based on that movie, just the way it sort of felt, his musing as he wanders through this house. I don't know if the sequence had been used, whether the movie would be any better or any worse. I mean, I certainly think there's something that may have been overly poetic about it. But I always liked it. I always liked what it said about him and the nature of his sort of longing for something different.
Anything wrong? Is there something the matter?
Ironically, was shot right next door to a maximum security prison in Chino. So we brought in these giant bales of hay so you couldn't see razor wire and machine gun towers, because it looked like it was shot at Treblinka or something.
Because I was going to say.
But that's what those giant platforms of hay are covering.
That's what I mean.
This is the original temp title sequence that became sort of the inspiration for it. We knew we wanted to do this hand-lettered title thing, and Kyle roughed together some of the background images, and it was based on this that we sort of got the idea of doing the making of the books. This is all material. I believe all the material in the background is from the books. But they were just like little snippets of it, just a little, you know, vignetted piece. Oh, Joe Frank's in there. We cast Joe Frank, who's a friend of mine. Joe Frank is a radio personality. He's a monologist and has an amazing show on KCRW and NPR, which used to be called In the Dark, and now I don't know what the name of his new show is. But we cast him to play the doctor that Richard Portnoy plays. And he ended up having to back out at the last minute, but the rough title sequence was, he's actually in the game. He's in the game, and he plays a doctor who's watching Michael Douglas, putting Michael Douglas through his tests, just sort of, you know, taking notes on a notepad and sort of scrutinizing him. But we wanted him to play the doctor in this. He always ends up playing those doctor roles. But this was just a title sequence that we whacked together to have something to show. That's Kevin Hunter, who's the songwriter. He used to be the lead singer of Wire Train. And that was his little cameo that we had where he's pounding the phone at the beginning. And this is a sequence I always loved. I always loved what we'd done, so we ended up cleaving half of it and using it before the library scene.
You care?
But there's a whole sequence that was supposed to come in between these two things. It was Morgan on the Amtrak coming back from upstate back into the city.
Where are you headed?
Far away from here.
And all the stuff obviously remains. He's going to bed in the metronome. And took it out pretty early. We took it out pretty much as we were cutting, and as we kept sort of saying, oh, and when we go to New York to shoot the Amtrak sequence, this will all make sense. And everybody from New Line was kind of going, when we go where and we do what? Well, if you didn't have it, and you won't, so what would you do then? So that's when we started thinking about another title sequence. It's funny though, because you get an idea of what a movie, how a movie is going to lay out, and then when you start to move it around, it is a fairly plastic medium. It is. There are things that you can live without. There are things that change the tone of it and things, but there are certain kind of just truisms to the story that, if they remain, it sort of covers the, it kind of covers the issues. It deals with your narrative necessity, and you can kind of move things around. People don't. The color of the ties can change, the color of the shirts can change, and people tend to follow it anyway.
Neighbors heard them screaming at each other like for 2 hours. It was nothing new. Then they heard the gun go off, both barrels.
She confessed?
No, she was trying to put his head back together, so crying too hard to say anything.
Why is it always after the fact? A sudden realization that that person can cease to exist.
Yeah, people suddenly realize that that's what it is to take a human life.
Let's look at all the passion on that wall.
Yeah, well, it's a done deal. All but the paperwork.
You kid see it?
Huh?
Hey, kid.
What kind of fucking question is that? We are all going to be real glad when we get rid of you, Somerset. You know that? It's always these questions with you. Did the kids see it? Who gives a fuck? He's dead. His wife killed him. Anything else has nothing to do with us.
Detective Somerset? I'm Detective Mills.
I have to say,
This guy paid me $500 to bring it out here, man. He said he wanted it here at exactly 7 o'clock.
Put it down.
That's a nice shot of Richmond. I wish we'd kept that.
Hands on the back.
Richmond Arquette played the internist in Fight Club. He's kind of one of these guys. He has such a great voice, and his voice sort of belies the way that he looks, because he looks so young and his voice sounds so old. I love the idea. In Fight Club, I love the idea of this guy who sounds like a real doctor, but he looks like, he'd rather be playing Nintendo. And especially if you have somebody who's going to be completely disinterested in Edward Norton's plight.
Some dough.
The scene missing cards in this scene are to hold the place of the helicopter footage, which we weren't allowed to shoot until after we... There's a kind of a catch-22 of test screenings, because, a lot of times studios, who've spent, I think they'd spent $30 million or something on this movie, and we hadn't been able to afford to do the helicopters, and we sort of held them out as, well, if you're good and you don't go too far over budget, you can go and shoot your helicopter stuff. Otherwise, we don't think it's really necessary. And so we'd shot this scene and just put scene missing cards in it, and your hope is always that when you see it with an audience, it'll become obvious to the people who paid for the movie that they now need the helicopter scene. But oftentimes what the scene missing cards do is just destroy the flow of the movie so much that the people who financed it get cold feet about whether or not to spend any more money on it at all. So you kind of, it's really one of those things that you go, I hope this works for the best. We tried this ending thing a lot of different ways with Morgan. We tried kind of, more emotional and more. We actually shot a couple of different versions of his finding the head in the box, and we went back to the first one because his instincts, I think, were exactly right, that it should just be so shocked he doesn't know what to do or say.
Tracy, it's disturbing how easily a member of the press can purchase information from the men in your precinct.
Throw your gun down!
I visited your home this morning, after you left.
That may be the one that we previewed, but it's slightly different from the one we sort of came to before. Yeah, I believe it was from this ending that we went to the ending with the gunshots down, and we went to black. And that was the last sort of attempt to sell going to black and ending the movie. And it was from that subsequent cut that it was decided that we needed to write the coda.
Put the gun down.
I'll show you with the box. What was in the box?
Because I envy your normal life.
Put the gun down, David.
It seems that envy is my sin.
Oh, what's in the box?
Not until you give me the
What's
gun.
in the fucking box?
Give me the gun.
He just told you.
You lie! You're a fucking liar! Shut up!
I remember we were shooting this, and Brad came over and put the gun against Kevin's head and pushed it away, and didn't really hurt Kevin. He was kind of, I don't think he was expecting it, but you could see that this look in his eyes like, this better not become part of the continuity, because I'm not doing this for every single angle. And we were kind of like, we had to kind of huddle by the camera after that and go, I think we got enough of him pushing the 45 against Kevin's temple, because I don't think Kevin's going to sit still for this happening the rest of the day.
Oh. He didn't know.
I think that's what we previewed in Chatsworth or wherever.
If you kill him, David, he wins.
That's pretty different from what, if you look at it on a shot-by-shot basis, it's very,
You shoot him.
that's a rough version of what we ended up with.
You beat us.
Look at this, and it's, very different from what's in the final movie, but it's not bad. It probably would have been just as good an ending as... It's one of those things when the drama's right, when it's a dramatic enough situation, that there's, as long as it's an honest reaction, it can be 15% this way or 15% that way, and it's still kind of truth. Oh, this is a shot I always wanted to do that we weren't able to. The kind of just going through the forest of those high tension towers and looking straight down, so it was just completely just like watching a bug, crawl up the side of a sand dune or something. This is one of those frustrating things about storyboards versus the reality of a location, because, oftentimes storyboard artists will shoot, this, or will draw things that you can't shoot. I mean, you'll look at it and you'll go, I love the way that horizon line looks. It's all sort of compressed on a 10,000 millimeter lens, and then the car looks great because it's shot at like 27 millimeter lens, and the guy's face looks great because it's like a portrait lens, like a 75 millimeter. But it's oftentimes you run into that, like going, why can't we make it look like the storyboard? Because there's all kinds of John Doe here. These are nice boards. Screen direction's all wrong, but they show you kind of what we had in mind. I could sort of come from that world of, pre-planning, and I mean, there's certain things that, I was able to say, yeah, I want to see this, I want to see past them looking at the van, and I want to, see the angle of, you know, these sort of angles of the gun. But I do think that there's probably more Sturm and Drang with these storyboards, you know, in terms of the angles than what I would be comfortable with. It just makes it too dramatic. I sort of use storyboards to remind me of key things that I want to see. This sequence, I believe, was kind of talked through once, and Jacques went off and did a version of the scene, and then I think we never really got to refine it after. I mean, I don't really like, you know, religiously go, okay, this is exactly what we're shooting. You use them as you know, to give everybody an idea of what's going to be going on. But on a movie like this, where you've got, I mean, you can put the camera anywhere you want in a field. It's not like we're ever gonna, you know, be in danger of putting the crane up high enough to be in a high tension line. So you just kind of get ideas of what you want to do. I actually believe that those storyboards were done sort of, at the time, if I can recall, we may have actually done those to kind of disprove the notion that it could be ended to back off the idea of Somerset shooting him. It may have been proof of concept that this wasn't going to work. But I honestly don't remember. The issue was always a simple one. The studio felt that Doe needed to be thwarted in some way. If he was going to take this guy's wife and kill her, and thereby kill the unborn child within her, that he needed to not get the thrill of being killed by the person that he wanted to be killed by. Which is a compelling argument, but I think you're splitting hairs at that point. And I think that was Brad's point always, was like, I don't think I'd even let him get those words out. I'd have unloaded this gun. And ultimately that argument is emotionally true. It's like, you know, in a weird way, the kind of double-edged sword of the movie is that you give the vengeance-crazed audience their bloodlust and what they come to movies for, but at the same time, you spelled it out for them for the 3 minutes before the trigger gets pulled, that this is the circumstances under which this choice is being made, and there's really no kind of satisfying, you know, there aren't enough bullets, there isn't enough, you can't do enough damage to him for it ever to be even. And I think that, you know, that was the thing Andy was, you know, always kind of talking about in you know, our story meetings was, wait, violence begets violence begets violence, and you can't, you know, that's what all kind of great moral drama, you know, that's Romeo and Juliet. That's like, a mistake is made, or in a moment of passion somebody does something that they feel is right, or that they feel is just, but that the repercussions of that are invariably unjust, and they can't be tied up in a neat bow. Everybody kind of loses. And so that's the thing that he had constructed, and he'd constructed it so well that, you know, whether Morgan had shot him, or whether Mills had turned the gun on himself, or whatever was going to happen at the end, it was just never going to tie itself up in a neat bow. So, you know, in the end, I have to agree with the most direct, dramatic wave is what's coming from Mills. He's lost too much. He's got nothing left to lose. And even though it's not as clever, I think it's dramatically satisfying and works hand in glove with the notion of what it was supposed to be from the beginning, which is you step into evil and you have evil on you.
The Gluttony set was based on actual police crime scene photos, which had to do with a real case of suicide. And the quality of that actual crime scene is what I tried to achieve here in this studio set that we built as if the room had been partitioned and extended and remodeled over and over again by a whole procession of occupants previously, so that you got a sense of layering, and that the age that had built up in terms of the thickness of paint and the accumulation of grease visually reflected the amount of prehistory, and perhaps suggested that there may have been other crimes or events taking place here. It had a kind of a thickness of foreboding that you could read from the caking of the grease on the windows. It was just the neglect and the obsession of the character that you found who occupied these spaces that was just written on the walls. For the greed murder scene, we made it an elegant office, and an elegant office is not a lot, you can do with the atmosphere of it. I mean, I could talk about what interested me in the design of that was the articulation of the ceiling beams and the finishes of the wood veneer and the detail of the doors. But it's not very powerful compared to a lot of the other design elements. What was interesting was, recreating the composite of that set with the approach from the side door and the back spaces rather than the normal kind of front door entry where you're coming in. And that was really David's idea. That's how he wanted to shoot it, and to accommodate that kind of rear entry. We ended up deciding to build it because we could never find anything that had that physical layout in an existing location. Well, you have in the police station and the library a reflection of the municipal control, the authorities, the established order. It participates also in design elements that have to do with period films, film noirs, particularly in the police station. And we wanted to give them a sense of the precedent of everything that went before in the life of this city. It's a city of, it has a kind of history to it, whereas all the murder scenes and the crime scenes were driven, the design of them was driven by the characters themselves, and they're trying to represent their sins visually in those rooms. There was a big fight with the studio to pay for all that construction. I just said, why don't you just go to an existing location library, like at UCLA or Beverly Hills Library. But they're all very modern and very bright, and you couldn't control them as easily, and they just didn't have the atmosphere. It just wouldn't work anywhere else. It's like, how could you possibly think about doing it somewhere else? Except maybe the New York Public Library in Manhattan, which I kept pushing for. As I thought, well, they'd be so happy not to have to go to New York to do it. They'd be thrilled just to build it here. In certain cases, the rooms were used as offices, but we were using them as residences, and I think the confusion of that helps to kind of also wrong foot the viewer to the point where you don't really know where you are, and the danger that you sense from the SWAT team not knowing what's through the next door is amplified because it's not a typical place to live. You're not really sure what kind of a place this is because you're seeing the kind of light fixtures and accessories you associate with office building, but the furniture is residential and domestic. So you're not quite sure what's going on here. What we're saying is that this is an abandoned office building that's occupied by crackheads, and they live there. But you don't know that that's what's happening until you get further. I think the design of the interiors is always tailored to the victims, and that the people inhabiting the spaces are placed according to their position in the world we're living in, their place in society. I don't think everyone lives equally. It's a diverse society, and that's part of the problem. There's the haves and the have-nots. The Red Cross idea came from a search for trying to illuminate the environment of John Doe's apartment using a mixture of all kinds of different light sources. I decided that because we couldn't use daylight, I would use every other kind of source I could find. And so if you look, there are fluorescents, there are incandescents, there are neons. So it just became logical to have a neon, and when I considered, what the neon should be, it just seemed to me that a man like him should have a neon cross. Well, the approach to the interiors is very cave-like, and as you move through it, you feel like you're descending into a basement world, particularly since we painted all the windows black. There's daylight outside, but we've closed it off, so you're now subterranean. The only light that exists is either artificial, a red neon cross, or a fluorescent tube. But there are also scratchings on the windows of various obsessive symbols of various kinds, of graffiti, John Doe's graffiti, that leak little chinks of light into an otherwise a dark, lightless world, a world with only darkness. We try to achieve in Lust the seediest, most indulgent, corrupt environment we could possibly muster, the lowest of the low. It involved working in an existing nightclub basement and adding wall partitions and creating a kind of another labyrinth. The approach to the palette of these scenes is to keep color out of it as much as possible, so that the red of the bloodstain reads as really the only color element in an otherwise sepia-toned world. Spoon-feeding the audience enough to keep their attention, letting the story flow from room to room, from clue to clue, and giving you those hints. You're, on the trail with the detectives. We try to give that flavor of, the importance of the common object. Some are more important than others, and some are more featured than others, but they all tend to communicate something, and they're thought about. Even the smallest detail, there's an idea to it, and a logic to it, and the world is constructed around that idea.
I'm Clive Piercy, the art director on the project for the notebooks, John Doe's notebooks.
And I'm John Sable, the designer for the books.
And we're going to explain a little bit how the process of how we work together on this project and how we put the books together, and some of the references and ideas that came to bear in bringing these things to life. We got a call from Arthur Max's office to design the John Doe notebooks, and I met with Arthur and David, and they outlined what they wanted. They'd had some work done before, and nobody was happy with it. They felt it was too kind of decorative, and they really had a specific look that they were after. They felt that we could do it. So we talked about references to kind of the Starn twins and Robert Frank and kind of the whole kind of Witkin and all of those things. And so they knew what they wanted, and they asked me to go away and do some ideas. And the thing they talked mostly about was the kind of it was the personality of his handwriting. They wanted this kind of obsessive quality to the handwriting. So I knew I wasn't able to do that, but I thought that I knew what they wanted. So I'd known John for a long time, and John has this amazing kind of calligraphic hand. And so I called him up, and he came in and just kind of took over.
Yeah.
And he immediately got this handwriting just nailed, and all of a sudden it started to, the visual side of it took a backseat to this kind of incredibly perverse stream of consciousness, anal handwriting that this guy had to have. And they sent over this copy that John had to handwrite. It was vitriolic.
Yes.
Well, I'd leave John alone for hours at the office. I'd just see him there, scrawling away at this stuff, head down. He got so into it. I mean, you couldn't come up to him and speak to him. His head was down. He was just churning this stuff out.
It was painful.
Yeah, it was.
The funniest, there was a lot of funny things that happened, but one of the funniest things that happened was I would go to Kinko's and have these things, I'd take these photographs that I found that had like a woman with a cloth, it was like she was dead and she had cloth in her mouth and she was drowned and bloated. I would take these really grotesque images of murder and mayhem, and I'd go to this Kinko's that was very, down in Torrance. It was a real, peaceful little place.
Yeah.
And I would say, I want these images put onto this plastic film. Remember the plastic film, so we could overlay these things, and we'd tape it. And after we got those, we would tape the things with this yellow tape that we found, and that looked like it was like sexual. It was like after sex, it was sticky and there was goo, and it was just like, it was like sheets, man. It was like, God, you could just smell this stuff.
And the people at Kinko's were just
they were freaking out. Yeah. They didn't know what I did and what I was. And,
They're used to real estate flyers,
Oh yeah. And and these kids would look at this stuff in their little blue aprons, and they'd go, oh fuck, what's this guy? Look at each top of the page, and they're all titled with lust or envy or whatever. And that we tried to alternate. Each page would have something happening that would be different. Little notations on the side, photographs that would be placed in specific places that would be maybe overlaid over copy, and the transparency would actually go over the top. Then they have a yellow piece of tape that would run, and each corner would be try to make it as meticulous as we could get it on the tape. We'd cut it so it'll look like that. I think that stuff is on the edge of, it's schmuck, but it's safe pornography. There's a sexual kind of tension there, or it's like bad art or popular art.
If there's a way of this, John Doe wasn't kinky in a normal way. He was even kinkier than the kinky guys, in a kind of straight way. I don't have another way of putting that, but I definitely felt that way. That we couldn't use sexy pornographic pictures. He got turned on by mutilated limbs and decapitated people and people whose fingers had been sawn off. That, to me, is what he found sexual.
All the photographs that we kind of picked, the photographs would be, a person that would be dying or someone that was tied up, almost like an S&M photograph.
One day he says, I found this place somewhere down by you in Manhattan Beach or something, some old stationer's store that had tape and that hadn't been touched since the 1950s. So he brought in all this old, he found this amazing archive of old glassine envelopes and paper clips and stuff that was like, and then we were like, God, this is amazing. We don't even have to, we don't even have to age some of this stuff.
Each one's taped on the outside of the edge, the rib of the binding on the outside. Each one of those books had a different library kind of tape that was color coded, and so if it was a green, this special kind of old green tape that we found, that would be like, you know, it could be envy or it could be lust or, you know, one of the 7 sins. And then
we both thought that these books, these composition books, should be they should be so anal that the guy actually made them himself.
And sewn them again.
He sewed them up himself. That was part of the process. So John hand sewed all this stuff, put them in the oven, baked these things so they went all kind of decrepit and old. When they came out, they were gorgeous.
Each book was hand stitched with either a special laundry thread or a suture. And we actually did them with operating needles because they were the perfect little bend to go in and working around all surgical kind of stuff. The mentality of the whole thing was to keep it kind of scientific and surgical. And then, you know, Clive kept saying, you got to make it more real. He kept pushing me because he was getting pushed to go that way. And I was getting really fed up, and you know, I'd keep going back through these files and I'd find, you know, stuff that the Crips wrote to my father in prison, and I learned the whole way they did stuff. And then there was this one file that the guy committed suicide, and there was a letter in there, the actual suicide letter, and I thought, I put it in one, and the guy killed himself. And Clive looked at this letter and he goes, wow, how did you write this thing? And I said, it's real. And he goes, what? It's real? I go, the guy's dead. And there were tears on the letter, and it was the way he wrote it.
It was all misspelled, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was terrible.
Terrible. It couldn't even spell happy.
No one could ever do it.
It was like happy was H-A-P-Y or something. It was unbelievable.
And we stuck that in.
And it was folded, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was folded, and we said, okay, leave it like that.
Oh,
and then we said, let people discover it. When they go through it, let these people have to deal. Let the filmmakers, for pushing us this far, let them have to deal with, is this real or not, or how they did it.
I am Melody McDaniel. I was responsible for doing John Doe's photography for the movie Seven. Besides taking the pictures, I was responsible for making the pictures kind of slightly off or imperfected. And I was even asked in other departments, in the art department, they were impressed with the way I was bleaching out my Polaroids, scratching on the negatives, stepping on them, and doing whatever just to make it look just to give it some texture. For the gluttony photographs, I brought this old land camera in because I was imagining that John Doe was somewhat of an amateur photographer, so I visualized him just sort of going into a thrift store or secondhand store and buying a cheap camera that is like an old-fashioned camera and just kind of making it work. I brought in my land camera that has a lot of light leaks in it, holes in it, so it's not perfect. So with the gluttony pictures, I went in and made things a little bit more abstract. That's what I wanted. I knew that I wanted them to look different than the crime scene type of photography, which is very Ouija-esque, flash, hard flash, very contrasty, where my pictures, I wanted them to feel a little blurry. I wanted them to see a little scratchy and have like imperfections on them, and being through that kind of camera, which was an old land camera, would help me give that effect, like even the lens being a little slightly soft. So nothing was really sharp. Some things were one part of the frame would be in focus and the other part would, half wouldn't. And I thought that might be an interesting way for John Doe to take his photographs. I use a lot of natural light. I'm untechnical. I don't use a lot of technical techniques to make my work, my images happen. I tend to just do a lot of guessing, and things just happen, and I get a lot of interesting mistakes that'll come up that I may not be able to recreate, but sometimes it works for the advantage and sometimes not. This particular film I was using is called 665 Polaroid film, and it's black and white, and it comes with a negative, which is the only, I think, Polaroid film that comes with a negative. So it lets you alter. The Polaroid film comes with a coater. If you don't coat the picture, it'll fade. It'll start to fade. So instead of coating them immediately, I just let them sit. And I let them kind of, even if I had my photo assistants take them outside of the studio and bake them in the sun so they start bleaching out. And then I even sometimes would take that, after bleaching them, I'd pick up the photograph, stick it back onto the negative, and so to create this weird texture. I just was very messy with them, so it was very interesting. And David, I went and presented this to David just to make sure I was I was on the right track. If this was something interesting to him, and he loved it. He goes, even push it more, make them more distorted, make it so even if you barely even have an image on one of the Polaroids. So I gave him a variety of that, and I noticed that with the Gluttony, I focused on my Polaroid camera, and also I did use a 4x5 land camera, because I used, again, they had a Type 55 film for the 4x5 camera, which I can do the same thing with the Polaroid. Just visually, for some reason, I just thought it was just a feeling I got, and I wanted, being that I also, as a photographer, I use 3 or 4 different cameras depending on the type of story I'm about to reveal. I think each camera can tell a story. Sometimes one, just it's a feeling I got. And for Gluttony, I just thought Polaroid land camera was perfect, and also a 4x5 land camera. Now for Greed, 35 millimeter. That was it. And what I did was, in the printing, in order to make the 35 feel a little bit, to show a lot of imperfections on that, I definitely had to tweak it in the printing. And instead of spotting the prints, there was a lot of dust in the darkroom, and I just kind of let it go. I just let it happen, just so it didn't look so perfect and clean. Because John Doe didn't strike me as even though he was seemed like an intelligent guy, that was, I didn't feel that he would want to go back and spot his prints to make sure it was perfect. Again, not being experienced, I kind of walked in feeling a little, I shouldn't say a lot unsure of what I was going to do, but I just went with what I thought would be the best. And I started to set up as I had to pretend like I had to kind of get into John Doe's head, as if what are the steps he would take to get through to this, the lawyer I think I was supposed to kill through with the camera. With the Greed photographs, I was working with the actor, David, in this case, again, it was very vague. He kind of didn't give me too much information. He wanted me to go in there and just sort of make things happen, however I saw it. I just think it's just interesting when you have your photographs are telling a story, but they happen to be on a piece of paper as you're turning the page, or, you know. I actually saw a book that was called A Paper Story, and I thought, or A Paper Movie, and I thought that was just so beautifully put for somebody who likes to tell stories with their photography, and it's almost so close to showing a film, showing your movie, showing your pictures in a cinematic way, but it's still, you know, not really moving, or it's moving at the pace you want it to move when you're turning the page. I don't know if that makes any sense. I was first a fly on the wall spying on him, so I had a Nikon 35mm camera with a wide lens, just so it felt like I was kind of distant. And then I started with a wide lens, so I was kind of far away. And then as I wanted to get closer to him, I switched lenses, you know, like a 50 and then 85 to 105. And as those lenses changed, I was getting more and closer to killing him. Sorry, I was going to say the victim. And I remember just being so excited because I actually particularly like to take pictures of dark things. And when I say dark, not just like literally the color, you know, dark like that. I just like things that are just unusual or not common, or things that like objects and also people that are just outcasts of society, I guess, in that sense. For some reason, I'm attracted to that. I noticed that I like telling stories with photographs, and I think it's also a way of eventually wanting to move into filmmaking and moving pictures. Gluttony was extremely abstract. Greed was more of a narrative, and with lust, it was a combination of both, where I was trying to make a little narrative by interchanging lenses to get closer to her, and also I wanted things to feel a little dreamy and abstract, so I shot things out of focus. The composition and the cropping was just way off, just so it looked spontaneous and just crazed for some reason. I just imagined John Doe just running around trying to keep up with her and without revealing himself. So I turned the lust into more like a narrative along with a visual abstract with the photography. I work with assistants, sometimes a couple, sometimes in the case with >sɛvən, I had 3 assistants, and they helped me with the process by manipulating the photographs, the Polaroids, and also the exposure, helping me scratch the negatives. They would take the film outside and step on it. They'd even open up the camera backs to let light in to give an effect of very amateur photography. And so within my process, it's really helpful to have a team of people to help my art. And my team was Cecil Cole, Eric Coleman, and Greg Scafidi.
All these photographs, I had no idea what I was up for until I actually looked at the real thing, what the police department actually had. They're pretty gritty, very, very contrasty black and white pictures. This image I liked a lot, which in a way it also gave some of his psyche of this dismemberment of a little, I think it was a little child, because he tore up the picture and then he left this piece of head and another piece of his body, 6 inches away on the wall. Shot all with flash. The police department doesn't believe in available light. It's more in the details and minutiae of a crime scene. Well, the existence of a photographer is sort of a pretty solitary. You're always outside, you're looking in. Now, John Doe's apartment, what we are looking through now, was built on a sound stage by Otto Max, who, as far as I'm concerned, a truly wonderful artist because of the little creations he really went into the man's psyche in such detail that it was amazing. In one room, he set up like what seemed like a little museum of horrors, of images about other people's murders, other crime scenes, like glorifying it in such a way that it was actually artistic. Well, these are the stills, the crime photos on the Gluttony set. David wanted to be sure that we show immediately in the pictures that this man just ate, and there's this tons of cans and bags of food all over the kitchen. I love this picture of the back of the man's head. You don't know if he's dead or alive, but by seeing these rolls of fat even on the back of his head, you get the message. The side view, well, there you see the whole thing. We had amazing makeup artists. Slot was like a combination of images which showed so much degradation that you wondered how could a human being be put through that and survive, 5 minutes. And this was truly one of probably the sickest of the murders for me to photograph the aftermath. Luckily, the body was removed. This is downtown Los Angeles, a real apartment where nobody lived for decades, I think. And it was just the filthiest thing. These are on the set of Greed. And these photos at this point just show that this is a very wealthy man because of the marvelous artwork in his office. You had the sense that she did not want to be seen like this ever, because she was a beautiful model, and she rather died. That was quite a comment. It's not as upsetting, at least not to me, maybe because it's black and white, than what I imagined this could have looked in the real scene, in the real crime scene. And also what the police told me, the stench, the smells are so terrible that luckily none of that I had to put up with. My name is Peter Sorel, and I am what they call a unit photographer, or a still photographer. My usual work, of course, is 75% color, and it involves the actors. Movies publicity and advertising dictates that is what I have to do. I start the film, I first read the script, and when I read the script I know immediately which half a dozen scenes or so are the key scenes in the film, which absolutely have to be covered really well. It doesn't mean that I won't cover the others, because many times accidentally something happens in a visual sense, but dramatically speaking you have to do those scenes which will enable the production company to the publicity arm of the company to market the film. The quality of the images, the film is different, not quite so grainy as motion picture film. If you want to blow up a still frame from a movie, it will blow up to not really a size of a poster, because it would be grain size of your fingers, it won't look very good. Whereas, a still photographer has the ability to pick a certain kind of film emulsion, which will enable him to have a frame which is really sharp. The grain is sharp, and therefore it will blow up. what we do started out in the early 1920s when to do a still shot you had a large camera, you know, and an assistant, and everything stopped and everybody posed, and this industry was based on that the still photographer is around the camera crew and around the actors, and he works usually when the shot is finished, he comes in. By the 1950s, this changed into try to shoot while they are rehearsing or while they're shooting, because we can't take that much time as it was possible before. All the rest, what I do, when you say, oh, well, okay, you're an artist, well, it's very nice to think so. However, many times the artistic pictures would be totally unusable for their purposes. And I don't mean this as a judgment for any company. It's the reality of what I like to do, maybe, is a picture of an empty set or of a shadow, and many times these pictures are totally useless. So you do this on your own time after you've done the material, what you have to, why they hired you. That is why you're there, and first you perform, then you play. It was one of the most interesting projects for many reasons. One was that it was an intelligent script, which made this terribly gruesome story visually and dramatically acceptable, I think, to the audience. The audience did not leave the movie theater gasping and throwing up, because we never showed the bodies. We showed very little of it. We never showed the actual act of violence, but only the outcome and the aftermath. So I really appreciated that. It was intelligent. I personally would much rather shoot during the actual performance, because actors give their all while they're doing it. And as much as they are, they say or then they mean that they will do it again for you, it's a little different. When you do it for a still camera, it's just a photograph, it's not important. When you do it for the film, you act. When you do it for a still, some actors act and some actors sort of sleep through it or smile pleasantly, you know, and that's not what we need. I mean, the drama is gone.
You wanna come take a look at this? He had a gun.
He's 2 murders away from completing his masterpiece.
Okay, here we go. We are rolling. Ready and action.
New Line Cinema and producer Arnold Kopelson team up with director David Fincher to bring you a thrilling film of mystery and suspense, starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and Gwyneth Paltrow. Seven.
Very nice. Much better. Okay, here we go. I think we're ready.
Seven is a new mystery thriller in which 2 homicide detectives are in a race against time to find a killer whose bizarre murders are patterned after the 7 deadly sins.
There are 7 deadly sins, Captain. Gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, pride, lust, and envy. You can expect 5 more of these.
Morgan Freeman plays Lieutenant William Somerset, a burnt-out cop on the brink of retirement who is forced to break in and train his new replacement.
I've worked homicide 5 years.
Not here.
I understand that.
Well, over the next 7 days, Detective, you'll do me the favor of remembering that.
I guess he thinks he's gonna sort of live out the rest of his life in some semblance of peace. But right after his replacement shows up, these serial killings begin. And he gets caught up in the investigation and is sort of trapped by his own need to solve the puzzle.
Opposite Freeman, Brad Pitt plays Detective David Mills, the new man in the precinct who may be in a little over his head.
Mills was very ambitious to make it to the big leagues in a sense, you know? Be the big fish in the big pond, get to the big city where the actions happen. I believe he talks his wife into it, though she doesn't want to go, but she does it for him. It's a bit of a selfish move. She's very unhappy there.
Balancing the story in the role of Detective Mills' wife, Gwyneth Paltrow plays Tracy.
Tracy is a very unique woman. She's very centered and very direct. Her husband is very career-oriented and he's very driven. And she knows all of this about him and she loves him very much anyway. He's a smart guy, he's a good cop. He loves the thrill of being a homicide detective, and they get entwined in this unbelievable serial murder case.
No fingerprints. Nope. Totally unrelated victims.
Yep.
And no witnesses of any kind.
I don't get it.
Well, we're up against a very bright man who has an enormous amount of will and patience.
John Doe is out to prove a point.
I feel like saying more, but I don't want to ruin the surprise.
His victims are all guilty of one of the 7 deadly sins.
There are 2 more bodies, 2 more victims. He's going to show the world its wrongdoings.
911, what's your emergency? I've gone and done it again.
It's his good work to eliminate them.
Just a bad, bad man. Truly evil.
In order to truly capture the gritty realism of the homicide detectives in action, the filmmakers enlisted the help of actual police officers who served as technical advisors, ensuring that every detail would be correct on screen.
We try to spend a lot of time with the actors. We help them with the type of weapons that they should carry, the way to properly deploy the weapons, properly handle the weapons. We want them to look like they are professional law enforcement officers, like they've been doing this as a career, and that they've been trained at it.
I went riding around with some detectives who kind of showed me the backside of what we see on television. And I'd have to say it was pretty hairy, going to calls, going to the morgues, learning to do this.
Perfect casting. Morgan Freeman is one of the great actors of our generation.
He carries this wisdom with him that is so evident, so apparent. You can't help but just have ultimate respect.
No, a reason to knock on this door. Think about it.
I have not seen a movie star like Brad Pitt since the 40s. He's a movie star in every sense of the word.
He's terrific. He's a fine young man and constantly absorbing and giving, you know, it's great.
Here we go, quiet now, and rolling. Marking. And action.
There was so much tension and mystery. You could see the audience right on the edge of the seat.
We're gonna get who did this. Brutally honest. You know, no fluff, nothing light here.
It will shock. It will disrupt. It's so hot, so exciting, so terrifying that I can't even go into it because you won't even believe what I'm talking about.
Have you ever seen anything like this?